and they mentioned Memento Mori in that movie. So it was interesting to kind of hear more about it in the Victorian age. Hopefully, my echo is gone now. My talk is going to kind of be about local history and how I collect it. Um, it's not gone. Let's see if I just cleared this. Sounds okay to you? Okay. Okay. So I live in the New York Hudson Valley. So this is kind of a map of the Hudson Valley here. I grew up here, Dutchess County. This is New York City down here. You got Connecticut. You got Massachusetts, Vermont, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So kind of give you like an idea of like where I live and what this is kind of be about. So when I first started collecting, I started at 12 years old. I collected this area right here, which most people do. You collect your town, you collect maybe some of the smaller towns or one big town next to you, but it really limits your, ability to collect. And I like to tell a story of and do presentations and things like that. So I decided to kind of branch out. I started collecting my entire county and in some of the little towns that are across the river. Of course, this is the Hudson River that goes down the middle of it all. But then I decided that I think I'm going to collect the entire region to really be able to tell a story of where I live in Dutchess County, because it's hard to tell a story without telling, the broader region of the story. So when I first started collecting, as I said, I collected this small area. Um, and I can tell the story of that little area, but everything is so interconnected to everything. Of course, I have New York City down here, you have Long Island, all of these other states that are around me that influence the history of this area. Of course, the Revolutionary War, the French Indian War, the Civil War was all very active in this area. Not the Civil War as battlefields, but people training, World War I training going on in this area as well. So just to be able to tell the story of where I live, I really had to broaden my horizons. So this just gives you an idea of what I collect. All of these counties, it's kind of like the handle of New York State, then into Catskill Park, which is the mountain area here, and some of the little towns, on the periphery. And as I go further away from where I live, I collect less and less of it, but I collect more topics that helps me tell the story of my immediate area. So that'll kind of give you like an idea of where this talk is going to go. So let me show you some images or postcards of where I grew up. This is Hopewell Junction. This is kind of like the little town or hamlet that I grew up right next to. Friends and I called it Hobo Junk Town. Everybody has little jokes about their own town. This is one of the first postcards I ever bought. I was about 12 years old. I was in middle school. eBay had just started, and this postcard came up. And where I lived used to be like a railroad town. And there was two different lines that crossed there, and I just had to have this postcard. I paid $8.37, something around there for it, which to me at 12 years old was like movie money. So it was super expensive. But coming to this is a very good purchase. I've only seen this card maybe once or twice after this. So kind of some other views of my little town. The smaller the town you find, the more you're going to be running into real photo cards. Kind of rule of thumb is that printed cards will come around again. Usually they made them in a minimum of about 500 cards. So I wouldn't spend all of your money on a printed card. Real photo cards, on the other hand, are much harder to find. They could have been made in single or just a few dozen of them being made. So it's worth spending your money or focusing more on real photo cards. Beautiful card here of the old Stevens store. That's the Hopewell Inn. You can see his little auto there and some of the carriages. This was right along the railroad. So this is what I focused on. This is a view looking the other way down the street. You can see the railroad cars here on the left. All of these little tiny buildings exist today. This guy, he has a big awning. It's called Geek's Place. His building's falling down a little bit today, but that's the old general store. Here's a view of the railroad station. So these are the hard cards to find of your town. Real photos of the railroad station, general store, post office. These are going to be the most sought after. I like this one because it has a little thing called Turner's Hotel. No relation to me, but it's cool to see your name in your own little town. Other views, hard to find, rare views, real photos of a railroad station, local ones, small towns are going to be very hard to find. It's worth spending your money on these because these are going to be harder and harder to find. Of course, being a railroad town, it was rural as well. We have our own Borden's Creamery. Borden started in my county. We were one of the major milk producing areas for the Civil War. So a lot of these creameries dot the region. So that's where I started collecting. It was getting harder and harder to find these views. There's a small town. There's not too many different views. This could have been the end of what I collect. Move on to something else. So I started branching out. This is the hamlet next door to me. This is New Hackensack. This was one of the first cards I bought outside of my immediate collecting era. And I couldn't resist. It was one of the little tiny general stores. I thought it still stood at the time, but it turns out it was torn down, I don't know, 80 years ago. But another good purchase, another card that I've never seen before. It's good to stick to these real photo cards. So as I branched out, I moved to the larger town that was near me. This is Wappingers Falls. This is a view of it in 1860. There's a postcard producer that made cards from old stereo views. So you can see this is the old library, one of the first libraries or public libraries built in America. You have the old iron works right there. You have the Presbyterian Church. And a lot changed in this, mostly because this ironworks here caught on fire and burned down most of the town. So it's interesting to find these things and then find the view of it in the future. So you can see there's the old library. It's been torn down and burned down. It's been replaced by this ironclad building. You can see some of the other buildings up the street. The old iron furnace, of course, burned, and some of the new buildings that were built. You can see this little building on the other side of the wall is this building right here. So it's interesting to get cards like this to compare the difference in history. And as you collect more and more, you find cards everywhere. Local antique stores, flea markets, and things like that. eBay is always a great reference. This card I purchased from a guy in New Zealand on eBay. It's a great view showing the old bleachery in my town. You can see the big factory here. There you can see the main street in the background with that iron-clad building. And what's interesting is bringing this history home. So you can see that it was sent to New Zealand in 1906. So over 100 years later, I brought it back to my town, and it becomes part of the local history. Moving on to just like other beautiful cards. As you collect, you find a honey hole. You find some nice parade cards. This is a view of the firemen's parade, some of the old Dutch buildings, and it starts to get you interested in other things, interested in purchasing or looking for fire things, or getting you more associated with the history. So I've had this card for a long time. I know where it is. It's on the bridge, looking up the street. But as you get more proficient in your local history, you'll come across something like this. This was on eBay maybe 3 weeks ago. It was labeled New York Town Parade. They didn't know where it was, but since I've had this card for such a long time, I could recognize everything in the background and be able to pick it up knowing that it is my hometown. So the longer you do it, the more you look at, the more you see, the more you can identify, what is in your area. So another view, this is an early view of my town. You can see the old bridge that the parade was on. These are the falls from Wappingers Falls. You can see the old factory building there on the top left. Yes, exactly. Can't beat an experienced eye. And here's another one showing a difference between maybe 15 years. You can see the factory here has been torn down, and they've built a pipe going out of the bridge across here to the new powerhouse that powers the big factory on the bottom of the hill. So it's always interesting to find cards that show the progress of time and show how your town has evolved. Not just postcards, CDVs, photographs, really be broad-based, stereo views as well. CDVs and stereo views are great for showing that transition from the colonial period into the Industrial Revolution. This is probably from the 1870s. It's showing a brand new building that was built on Main Street. You can see it's a dentist. It's Corning Hall, right on Main Street. And here's that same building in the 1940s. Still there. Buildings are now all around it. Sadly, this building collapsed in 2015, somewhere around there, so it no longer exists. But luckily, we have these old photographs if somebody wants to rebuild it as it was. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things is to find these cards that show, how a town has evolved. Another view of Wappingers Falls. This is one of the factory buildings, a printed card, but shows that is the Sweet Orin Company factory. I don't know if anybody knows Sweet Orin Company, but they were one of the first denim manufacturers. They made overalls. So what's interesting is that you can also find trade cards. This is the Sweet Ore Company. They were famous for their durability. So here they are trying to tear a pair of pants in half, but they can't. Even these men can't tear down or tear apart the well-made jeans made at Sweet Ore. A lot of people like to collect images of the same image, black and white, green and white, real photo. I don't particularly like to do that, but I do collect views that show different scenes of the same thing. This is the Zion Church and Rectory. It's a Presbyterian church. So this is it in the winter without snow, but then I'll also collect it after a snowstorm. Same view, different mood, showing it in kind of a different light. And then this is another real photo showing it at night, kind of like a photographer's trick probably, but just gives you a different flavor of a different place. So this is like my immediate collection, what I really wanted to focus on in collecting. But I grew up in a smaller hamlet, which are harder to find. The smaller the place, the harder it is to find the cards. But at one time, it was a training place for the military during the Texas Border War. This is Fishkill Plains, where I grew up. This is probably the most people that have ever lived or stayed in Fishkill Plains. It was a military camp. My farmhouse where I grew up was probably just beyond these hills over here, but you can see there's the immense amount of people that were camped there. Here they are marching from the railroad to my small little hamlet. And you can see the numbers on these cards. So this is number 153. So there's at least 150 cards of this camp. I maybe have 30. So you can just keep collecting these pretty much forever if you can find them. Another view of the camp. I like to see views of landscape as well. This is all forested today, so it doesn't look anything like this. And as you collect that, you start broadening your horizons again. So this is New Hamburg. This is a hamlet on the Hudson River. And this is everyone from Camp Whitman trying to get onto the ferry. So here you have all the horses and all the men in this town waiting to get onto the ferry. Now, one thing about damage is that I really don't care too much about damage on a card. A lot of people like crisp edges and perfect, but really with local history, it's more important to have the image itself. I'm not going to pass up an image because it has a giant chip to it or scratches or scribbling on it. if it's showing like the local history, then it deserves to be preserved. So this one has a big stain spot on it, but I really don't care about that. And then here we go. Here they get onto the ferry on their way down to New York City. So I also like cards that tell a story. So you can link these together to tell a story of these men, where they came from, how long they stayed, where they went, how they got there. It's just like an interesting way to tell a visual story. So those are my local cards. I probably have thousands of them. But I don't have things that tell a general story. Like if I want to tell a story about the automobile, it's going to be hard to find a bunch of photographs that are going to tell a story about my county. So I need to branch out to these other areas to tell the story. So here's a view of Cliffside, New Jersey. This will tell the story of, moving wagons before the automobile, before the truck, also with advertising. So this is pretty far out from where I live, but it is a great image that I can use and incorporate into a talk or a display. Of course, again, I collect the Hudson River Valley. So the Hudson River was a big barrier. Here's another view of automobiles. This is before they built any of the bridges across the Hudson River. So, of course, you had to take a ferry across, and you had to wait. You had to wait in line. You had to wait in a traffic jam for all these other cars to get off the ferry, all the motorcycles to get off. But it also tells the story about the automobile with the advertising. You got spark plugs, Saucony motor gasoline. You have a garage over here. So this image itself is telling the story of the automobile in my region. This could have been anywhere along the Hudson River, kind of the bottlenecks of getting across the river. Moving further up the river, this is the Kingston Garage and Motor Car Company storage. So this is an early garage. And these kind of evolved out of the blacksmith shops. Once people stopped having wagons and things like that, they, had to move on with the times and start learning how to fix cars. So I don't have any views of a garage or a mechanic shop in my own county, but here's a great image with great advertising from someplace that's just across the river. And then you have to find the pitfalls of driving too. This is Dr. Kimball's auto wreck in Rifton. Here's one down near New York City. There's another car accident of somebody that drove off the bridge. And you can see that people came from all around to see this. It was a novelty. You don't see too many cars. You don't see too many auto accidents either. So everybody's here standing around early rubbernecking. This is again across the river from where I live, the Marlboro Garage. Very typical of these auto garages, kind of have this step roof lines. This one is probably around 1912 to 1915. It's a really early card. This one here is probably the same. And then as you progress further, then you get into roadside. This is the 1920s in Phoenicia, New York. This is the Rip Van Winkle Trail. So there's Rip Van Winkle, and you start getting this great signage. These are usually on snapshots. You find a lot of snapshots of roadside signs. I was showing their documentation of them taking one of these road trips, which I love to do myself. So that's a story that you can tell about the automobile. Even though it's not in my area, it's in my region, it can help it tell a story. Here's a beautiful card from where I live now in Poughkeepsie. It's the Poughkeepsie Ice Company. This was out at Upton Lake, which is in Clinton Corners, New York, in the middle of the county. This is one of the only images I have of ice or an ice delivery wagon or ice related in my county. So it's interesting and a great image, but it's hard to give a talk from one photograph. You're from Marlboro, New York? Ah, that's cool. So is Snooky from the Jersey Shore. So here's another ice wagon. This is from Ellenville, New York, across the river from me. See the guy with a giant ice cube? This is a Percheon horse. This actually photographed, somebody emailed me to put this into the Percheon Horse magazine. This is American Ice Company. So you can see that this is the Hudson River ice industry was huge in the area. There wasn't any ice manufacturing in Dutchess County where I live, but all around me there was these ice companies. This is Athens, New York. This is them carving up the ice and bringing it into one of the big barns or ice houses. Another view of workers. This is in, I believe, New Baltimore, which is near Albany, New York. Dangerous job, falling into the ice. These ice cubes were huge and heavy. But this allows me to tell a story about this card of Poughkeepsie and how it came to be, where this ice came from, to tell the story of a local business. This is a view of where I grew up. This is Stormville, New York, another small hamlet. A family haying in the field. This is a very agrarian area. Of course, we're bringing food down to New York City. But I don't have many photographs of the farms around me. I have views of the houses and everything like that, but not of them physically farming. So again, this is from the Catskills, of them haying there. Yeah, I love haying images. When you travel around the world, everybody stacks their hay in a different way. And it's interesting to see how different cultures stack their hay. Of course, New York is famous for their apples. So this is apple barrels coming out of the orchards. This is across the river from me in Plattekill. I would hate stacking hay myself. This is Ohioville. This is near New Paltz, New York. There's a college there. Here they are cherry picking on the street. Pretty rickety ladder. So telling the story of the agriculture in the area. Again, I only have one view of my little town, but I can supplement it with other cards from the region. And of course, people travel. I have been to every single town in the Hudson Valley. Most people have as well. Travel to work or travel to go apple picking or strawberry picking. You're all over the region. Your first kiss was in a hayloft? Ah, funny. Hunting was also a very big thing in the area. So I like to collect views of hunting. This is a wildcat or near Roxbury, New York, which is pretty far afield. Of course, when you're hunting, you have to go to the butcher shop. This is an interior of a butcher's window in Jeffersonville, New York. They hunted bears, they hunted deer, they hunted quail. There's so much imagery of it. And of course, if you don't want to eat the meat, then you come to these people who did taxidermy and made beautiful coats and grew their hair out very long and spookily. Ooh, did I pick out too many cards for this talk? And then people. I like to collect people as well, images of people. These are people in Haines Falls in the Catskills. They're going to go to the Catskill Mountain House. So you start them here at Haines Falls. They go to the Incline Railroad. that went up the mountain to the mountain house. So I wanted to collect these to show vacations. A lot of people from New York City came up to vacation in the region. They came to my county and all the other ones to get some fresh air. And then once you start collecting these images, you start collecting the photographer himself. This photographer was from Staten Island, New York, just off the coast of Manhattan. And he also took pictures of Staten Island. This is my favorite one that he took there. This is a night scene illuminating at Coney Island as seen from Staten Island. So this is Staten Island. You can see how dark it is. And then in the distance, you can see all the rides and everything lit up at Coney Island in Brooklyn across the Verrazano Strait. And then as you collect the Catskills, you start to collect the humor. Greetings from Catskills. So these are cats killing, hunting the deer. Another cats killing or hunting. There are probably 1,000 different views of Catskill cats. And then you start collecting the history or how things have changed. This is Rock Royal, New York. This is up in the Catskills, a very small hamlet. Another view from the creek. And this village would be destroyed by the Papacton Reservoir. New York City needed clean water, so they flooded this valley. And everything in it is now under a massive amount of water. The hamlet of Papacton, this is also gone today. Beautiful covered bridge over here. As they brought it down through the Hudson Valley, they're building the aqueduct. This is in Westchester County. Papacton is up here. And they built a chain of reservoirs through Ulster, down into Orange, crossing the Hudson into Putnam, and then building the Croton system in Westchester. So this is the pipe in Westchester. The post office in Kensico. Kensico was also flooded when they built the Valhalla Dam. So for the most part, I collect buildings and scenes, but I've started to change to collect images of people. I like pictures of photographers. This is the photographer Porter out of Ellenville, New York. Here he is with all of the glass slides with his helper. Stereo views show some of the early photographers. This is Bickelman's photography studio in the Catskills. And then just images of daily life. Lime Quarry Cave. All the different people, all the different characters. And historic characters. This is Uncle Sam, born in 1819. William Smith in the Catskills. Supposedly this is who Uncle Sam was based off of. There's a lot of speculation that it's not true, but he does look like Uncle Sam. Of course, you can't have Uncle Sam without Lady Liberty. This is a photographer out of, where is this out of? Kingston, New York. And just daily life. This was a roadside seller. He's making a potato dish. People passing by. Views of workers. A hand cart. Yeah, daily. This is what I like: the pictures of people working. Or I started collecting local cabinet cards now, especially after Whatnot and seeing everybody's nice collections. This is Vale Brothers. Picture of a girl's beautiful hair. This interesting looking family. This is something that I really didn't uh, collect before. I like how they all took their hats off and placed them all around. Just other views of people and places. So this is something I didn't particularly collect before. I collected images of places and not so much people, but my tastes have changed, and now I'm looking for more images of people. This is a fireman's parade in Catskill, New York. Showed this to somebody else, and he said this is the first example of cloning that he's ever seen. Just a great photograph. Right? Especially in the Catskills, it was a big hunting area. So this guy is selling, what is it? Roasted nuts, roasted peanuts. This is out of Athens, New York. This is probably one of the best photographers in my area. I don't have any images of the inside of a post office. This is Jewett, New York. So this is a great image to put in a lot of my talks. See the big cast iron stove and the postmaster here. His window with all of the advertising on it. Of course, storefronts I love. This is the Ossining Candy Kitchen. This is in Westchester County on the Hudson River. I love it when everybody's standing outside of the door in front of the store. This is a photographer, Otto Hillig. He was actually one of the first people to own an airplane in the region. He's also a photographer. You can see Hillig's studio. This is Otto Hillig driving, his wife, kids. Of course, it's always nice to have a nice description on the back. Another thing I like to collect is early houses. Quiet Home in the Catskills. I love these kind of ramshackled log cabins to show how difficult life was in the wintertime. Not everyone had a beautiful, stately house. Sometimes it's just boards nailed together. Another early log cabin, a guy with his goats. Maybe this was a hunting lodge. Maybe his full time house. Yeah, as long as it kept the rain out. Um, Black Americana, I always find very interesting because it's just very hard to find photographs of that history. Here they are in their log cabin in Deposit, New York, which is a pretty rural area in the Catskills. So I collect any of the Black Americana anywhere in the region. AME churches, the African Methodist Episcopal churches as well, which are very hard to find. So the further I get away from where I live, the less I collect or the more topical I become. This is Cox's Mill. It's a sawmill in the Catskills, but I love it because it has also this one, which shows all the workers that are standing around up here. It shows a close up of them. So I won't buy every card of every single town, but if it's a nice image or shows something that I don't have in another area, I'll pick it up. Yeah, it's tough. It depends on like how many collectors there are and like what the more topical it is. Like Here's a view. This is way out up in Rensselaer County, like really the periphery of what I collect, but he's a beekeeper. And that's like a really interesting topic, something you really don't find. Plus, he has an amazing neck beard. So it's just such a unique image. It's hard to put a price on it. I only know what I'm willing to pay for it is what the price I think it's worth. It almost looks like a fake beard, right? I always think about like maybe I'll grow a beard like this. He has a great chin. View of the Hudson River, camping. I love anything that has an American flag in it. And then views of how things have changed. Here's a view of the Hudson River at Bear Mountain. You can see the mountains in the background. And then you can see they built the road on it. So they've cut a scar across these mountains for the road. And it is a terrifying road. It still exists today. It goes from Cornwall to West Point. It's called Storm King Highway. And it is steep and it has this crazy rock wall that goes right down a cliff into the river. Finding views of a hotel in its heyday in the Catskills. Just a few years later, it's collapsing. This is a stereo view of Rosendale, New York. This was famous for the canal, the D&H canal that went from Pennsylvania to the Hudson River, bringing coal down to New York City. And it was a booming town. Till the railroad came and there was no use for a canal. But the town survived. They just paved over the canal. And that's why I love stereo views, showing that transition from, as I said, the colonial period into the Industrial Revolution. This was a Civil War factory that made cannonballs in a place called Glenham, New York, just next door to where I grew up. By the time Postcards came around, it was a ruin. This is the bridge from Poughkeepsie over to Highland, New York. Beautiful dayliner that brought people up from the city to see the beautiful views on the Hudson River. So it makes sense to collect the other side of the river. This is the Crossroads gas station right before you got onto the bridge. So I could just collect Poughkeepsie, but the other side also had an impact on where I live. Here's a launching of one of those dayliners, the Hendrick Hudson, built in Newburgh, New York. And here it is going under the Poughkeepsie train bridge after it was built. Largest dayliner, could fit 2,500 people on its decks. Got a little bit of time left. I'll show you some other beautiful photographs, kind of showing the history of the area. I love construction views. This is a construction of a house in Yonkers, New York. I can't find where it is exactly because every house in this area of Yonkers looks exactly like this. I think these were painters. The house was already built. I think they're just painting it at the time. Another view of, this is Beacon, New York, where I used to live. This is an old colonial house that no longer exists. So that's, again, what I'm saying, that I love stereo views that show this colonial period in the 1860s and 1870s before everything was torn down, for advancement or better housing or to be built as a factory. I believe a bunch of row houses replaced this one. And I love colonial houses, and a lot of them no longer exist, like this one. The old colonial fort, built in 1710. used as a stockade during the French and Indian War. So a lot of these old stone Dutch colonial houses no longer exist, but was really kind of the edge and the frontier of the United States at the time, especially in the early 1700s. This was wilderness up in the Hudson Valley, even though we're only 60 miles north of New York City. The old post office in Wittenberg definitely doesn't exist anymore. It's just, we're lucky to have these like images that show these colonial houses. Hurley, another early, late 1600s house. This whole town was from the 1600s. Telling you about the reservoir, I bought a collection of maybe 100 different images of this town called Ashokan. And they built the reservoir that drowned maybe 6 or 7 little towns. And the workers came from all over the place to work there. And here's their baseball team called the Reservoirs. Here's the surveyors. Now, I didn't keep every single image of the 100 I had. I maybe kept 10 of them. The 10 that I thought kind of represent, gave you a flavor of what it was like. I love this guy kind of leaning in a weird way. You also have the black workers that are over here kind of onto the side, not really in the main group of the photo. This is the restaurant for the reservoir workers. You can see the cook, but I love how you can see the postcards that are for sale as well. The barber shop on the other side of the wall. You can buy a cigar in the back. All right, we're running out of time. Another thing I love to collect is postcards that I already have from somebody. So this is signed AES, man and wife on the horse next to an old Dutch house. I had this card for a long time. 10 years later, I find another view of their house, also signed AES. I had this a few times in the hub from different cards, finding it from the same sender. So I try to keep it. Topical cards, house moving. So this is the old firehouse being moved down the street. These are very hard to find. Another view of a house being moved up the street. View of a fire in Athens, New York. But what I love about it is that I found another card of people watching the fire. This I find more interesting. I have so many other cards to show. I wish I had more time, but I'll leave you with this. This is probably the card that is of Margaretville, New York. Probably the most far afield card I have. But everybody dressed as bears. So what I'm saying is, when you collect something and you collect your town, I think it's more interesting to collect the broader region, to collect everything around it as well, because it'll tell the story of where you live in a different way. Everything is kind of connected in a way. So even this card will tell a story of your local town, of what Halloween was like or what celebrations were like. To not limit yourself, as I did when I first started collecting, to really open yourself up to collect a different region. It also helps when you travel around your area, you'll start to recognize things and appreciate it more. So I know it's a little bit of a weird topic, but I hope you learned something from it and enjoyed it. Let me read you guys out. Thank you for hanging out. Let's see where I can send you. El Ephemera is next. And I hope you have a good night.